Hey everyone, welcome back to our podcast. I'm Sarah, and with me as always is my good friend Alex. Today, we're diving into something that might surprise you: why failing students, or those who don't necessarily thrive academically, often become super successful and, dare we say, rich.
Yeah, it's one of those topics that feels like it goes against everything we're taught in school. The whole study hard, get good grades, and you'll succeed mantra. But more and more, we're seeing stories of people who struggled in school but ended up becoming millionaires or even billionaires.
Exactly. And it's not just a few isolated cases, it's almost like a trend. So, what's the deal? Why are some of the students who fail or drop out of school the ones who end up at the top? I think it's a fascinating conversation, and we'll dive into a bunch of reasons behind it.
Right, and we'll explore how traditional education systems may not always foster the kind of skills that lead to wealth. Plus, we'll look at some real world examples. I'm really excited to break it down with you.
The traditional education system's focus.
So, let's start by talking about what traditional education really emphasizes. Schools in general are designed to reward compliance, memorization, and following the rules. There's a heavy focus on academic achievement through standardized tests, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're taught to aim for good grades, listen to the teacher, and follow the curriculum. And honestly, that system works for some people, but it's pretty rigid. It's like we're conditioned to think in a linear way, but success in the real world is rarely a straight line.
Totally. And the problem is, not everyone fits into that system. Some students have different learning styles, interests, or maybe even entrepreneurial mindsets that don't mesh with traditional education. But the school system often doesn't recognize or nurture those differences.
That's the thing. The traditional model doesn't really reward creativity, risk taking, or failure in a productive way. In fact, it kind of punishes failure. If you don't do well in school, you're often seen as not living up to your potential. But in the real world, failure can be one of the best teachers.
Why failure can be a catalyst for success.
That's a great point, Alex. In school, failure is usually seen as a dead end, a bad grade, a missed opportunity. But outside of the classroom, failure can be an incredible catalyst for success. Think about it. Failing forces you to adapt, to find creative solutions, and to develop resilience.
Yeah, failure teaches you to think on your feet, to pivot when things don't go as planned. And these are the qualities that can lead to success in business, entrepreneurship, and even investing. When you fail, you're often forced to take risks or to step outside of your comfort zone, which can lead to breakthroughs.
And some of the most successful people we know today didn't do well in school. Take Richard Branson, for example. He struggled with dyslexia and dropped out of school at 16. But now, he's one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world. He often talks about how his failures helped him build the Virgin brand.
Absolutely. And let's not forget Steve Jobs, who dropped out of college after just one semester. He always said that dropping out allowed him to take risks and focus on things that truly interested him, like calligraphy, which ended up influencing the design of Apple products.
There's also Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, and even Elon Musk. These are people who didn't exactly follow the traditional path, but they embraced failure as part of their journey. So, while the school system might emphasize success as getting A's and moving up through the ranks, real world success often involves navigating and learning from failure.
Another aspect we should touch on is critical thinking. School often trains you to think in certain ways, memorize information, solve problems based on what you've been taught. But in the real world, problems are much more complex and dynamic. People who fail academically often develop better problem solving skills because they have to figure out how to succeed in other ways.
That's so true. And failing in school can sometimes push people to ask more questions, challenge norms, and look for unconventional answers. These are all essential traits in business. When you think about entrepreneurs, they're not just following rules, they're breaking them, innovating, and finding new ways to solve problems.
Yeah, it's almost like failing forces you to become more self reliant. Instead of looking for validation from grades or teachers, you start to create your own systems for success. And in the process, you develop resilience, which is key for long term success.
That reminds me of Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx. She talks about how her dad encouraged her to fail when she was growing up. He would ask her, "What did you fail at today?" And if she didn't have anything, he'd be disappointed. That mindset helped her not be afraid of failure, and she ended up turning a $5,000 investment into a $1 billion business.
Exactly. If you're taught to see failure as part of the learning process, rather than something to avoid, you become more willing to take the kinds of risks that lead to big rewards. And often, that willingness to take risks is what sets successful people apart from those who just play it safe.
Rebellion against the status quo.
Another interesting thing about failing students who go on to be rich is that they often rebel against the status quo. In school, the rules are pretty clear: study, follow instructions, get good grades, and you'll be fine. But some students just don't fit into that mold, and instead of conforming, they push back.
Yeah, and that rebellion can lead to a mindset of questioning everything. Why do things have to be done a certain way? Why can't I do something different? That questioning of the norm is often where innovation begins.
Right? And in business or entrepreneurship, the people who succeed are often the ones who do things differently. They're the disruptors. Think about Uber. The traditional taxi industry was established, and it worked in a certain way. But then Uber came along and flipped the entire model on its head by asking, why do taxis have to operate like this?
Exactly. Or even Airbnb. Before Airbnb, no one thought of renting out a spare room to travelers as a legitimate business. But the founders of Airbnb saw an opportunity where others saw a closed door. And that kind of thinking, questioning the norm, is something that many failing students tend to develop naturally because they've been pushing back against the traditional system their whole lives.
Learning outside the classroom.
This brings me to another important point: the idea that learning doesn't only happen in the classroom. So many successful people who struggled in school were learning in other ways, through hands on experience, through passion projects, or by diving into subjects they were truly interested in.
That's a huge point. The world is filled with ways to learn that don't involve textbooks or exams. People who don't do well in traditional schools often excel in self-directed learning, which can be even more valuable in the long run. They learn how to teach themselves new skills, adapt to changing environments, and figure things out on their own.
Yeah, and that's where passion comes into play. If you're not interested in what you're learning in school, you're probably not going to do well. But outside of school, if you're passionate about something, whether it's coding, design, or business, you're more likely to dive deep into that subject and become an expert.
That's how people like Elon Musk taught themselves complex subjects like rocket science. They weren't relying on formal education, they were driven by curiosity and passion, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons why failing students sometimes succeed later in life. They find what truly drives them, and they go all in.
The power of networking and building relationships.
Another skill that often gets overlooked in traditional education, but is crucial for success, is networking. Failing students sometimes build strong interpersonal skills outside of the classroom because they have to. They learn how to connect with people, form partnerships, and build relationships in ways that can be much more valuable than getting an A on a test.
Yes! Social skills are key. You could be the smartest person in the room, but if you don't know how to collaborate or communicate, you're going to hit a wall. People who don't do well academically often lean on their social abilities to succeed. They're the ones who know how to sell an idea, pitch a business, or lead a team.
Right. And in today's world, who you know can sometimes be just as important as what you know. That's not to say that connections are everything, but building a strong network can open doors that academic success alone might not. Many successful entrepreneurs and business people have strong networks that helped them climb to the top.
Absolutely. And it's not just about schmoozing or making shallow connections. It's about building genuine relationships with people who believe in you and your vision. That's something school doesn't teach you. But failing students often learn it the hard way, and it pays off.
Confidence, determination, and grit.
I think another key element here is confidence. When you fail, especially in an academic setting, you have two choices. You can let it crush your self esteem, or you can develop a thick skin and push forward. Many of the students who end up becoming rich have this incredible sense of self belief, even in the face of setbacks.
That's so true. Confidence, determination, and grit are often born out of failure. When you failed over and over again, but you keep going, you start to build this internal resilience. And when you finally do succeed, it's not just luck, it's the result of all those times you kept pushing forward.
Exactly. That's what separates a lot of successful entrepreneurs from the rest. They're not afraid to fail because they've been doing it for years, and they've built up the confidence to know they'll find a way to succeed eventually.
Why the education system isn't for everyone.
You know, Alex, we've talked a lot about how failing students can eventually become successful, but I think it's also important to dig into why the education system doesn't work for everyone. We've hinted at it, but there's more to unpack.
Absolutely. One of the biggest issues with the traditional education system is that it's designed around a one-size-fits-all approach. Most schools, especially public ones, don't account for the fact that people learn differently. Some students are visual learners, others are auditory, and still others are kinesthetic, meaning they learn best through hands-on experiences. But the system tends to prioritize certain types of intelligence over others.
Right. And it's not just how students learn, but also what they're learning. Schools often emphasize subjects like math, science, and literature, important subjects for sure, but they don't leave much room for creativity, entrepreneurship, or even practical life skills like financial literacy or critical thinking. For someone whose brain is wired for innovation or building things, sitting in a math class for hours might feel like torture.
Yeah, exactly. The curriculum is geared toward producing students who can follow instructions and work within existing systems. That's why you often see the same pattern. Students who do well in school often go on to be employees or fit neatly into corporate environments. There's nothing wrong with that path, but for people who think outside the box, it's stifling.
And it goes deeper. In school, you're rewarded for memorizing facts, regurgitating information on tests, and following the curriculum. But in the real world, memorization isn't necessarily going to get you far. What really matters is creativity, adaptability, and problem solving, skills that you don't necessarily develop in a traditional academic setting.
Exactly. And Sarah, let's not forget the impact of standardized testing. These tests are designed to measure students' proficiency in specific subjects, but they don't measure creativity, emotional intelligence, leadership, or other qualities that are essential for success in life. If you're someone who doesn't perform well on standardized tests, you might be labeled as a failure in school, even though those tests don't capture your full potential.
That's such a good point, Alex. Standardized tests can actually limit students by making them believe that they're not smart or capable because they don't excel in the specific areas those tests measure. But what happens when someone who might fail a test is brilliant in another area, like business, art, or technology? The traditional education system doesn't always recognize that brilliance, and that's a big part of the problem.
Learning through experience.
One thing I think is crucial to success, especially for those who may not thrive in academic settings, is learning through experience. Life, business, and even personal development often require hands-on learning, trial and error, and figuring things out as you go.
Exactly. I think about some of the most successful entrepreneurs out there, and many of them are self-taught. They didn't rely on formal education to teach them how to build a business or develop a product. They learned by doing, and the failures they experienced along the way were just stepping stones to success.
Yeah, and there's something really powerful about the lessons you learn through experience. In school, you might be penalized for getting something wrong, but in real life, those mistakes are often the best teachers. When you try something and it doesn't work, you figure out what went wrong, adapt, and try again.
Absolutely. It's that process of experimentation and iteration that can lead to huge breakthroughs. You don't need a degree to tell you how to solve a problem or innovate. You just need the grit to keep going when things don't work out.
I think that's why so many failing students end up succeeding later in life. They've already had to develop resilience by facing setbacks in school, so when they hit obstacles in their careers or businesses, they're better equipped to handle them. They've learned not to fear failure, but to embrace it as part of the process.
Yes, and that brings us to the idea that school doesn't necessarily teach you how to take risks, but life does. People who've faced challenges in school and learned from their mistakes tend to develop a higher risk tolerance, which is critical for entrepreneurship or even investing.
Risk taking and entrepreneurship.
Risk taking is so central to this whole conversation. Think about it. When you start a business or pursue something unconventional, you're putting yourself in a position where failure is almost inevitable at some point. You're taking risks, whether it's with your time, your money, or even your reputation.
Exactly. And those who failed in school often develop a natural ability to manage risks because they've already had to navigate a system where they didn't succeed. They know what it feels like to fall short, so they're less afraid to put themselves out there again. It's almost like they've become comfortable with the uncomfortable.
That's so true. And it's not just about taking risks, it's about taking calculated risks. You see a lot of these successful entrepreneurs who started as failing students. They're not just reckless. They assess the situation, make decisions based on their knowledge and instincts, and then take the leap.
Right. And another key point is that failure doesn't feel as catastrophic when you've been through it before. If you've failed at something as significant as school and come out the other side, taking a risk in business might not feel as intimidating. You've built that resilience, that mental toughness to handle setbacks and bounce back stronger.
And then there's the financial aspect. Many people who struggled in school may not have had the traditional pathways available to them, like getting into a high-paying job immediately after college. So they might have been forced to think outside the box. Maybe they started their own business, invested in something risky, or found a niche market to serve. These are risks that someone with a more traditional path might not even consider.
Financial literacy and building wealth.
That's such an interesting point, Alex, especially when it comes to financial literacy. Many schools don't teach students how to manage money, invest, or build wealth. Yet, these are essential skills for anyone who wants to be successful in the real world, especially for those who want to build businesses or create financial freedom for themselves.
Yeah, financial literacy is a huge missing piece in the education system. I mean, how often do students learn about things like budgeting, investing, or even basic financial principles? For students who don't do well academically, especially, the drive to succeed might push them to learn these things on their own. And that's often where real wealth building starts.
Totally. If you think about it, a lot of self-made millionaires and billionaires, especially those who didn't follow the traditional academic path, have an incredible understanding of money, investments, and how to make their money work for them. They didn't learn it in school, though. They learned it by doing, by making mistakes, and by taking risks.
Right. And because they weren't following the typical career ladder, they had to figure out their own financial path. Many successful entrepreneurs invest in assets like real estate, stocks, or their own businesses. They understand the power of compound interest, multiple revenue streams, and passive income, all things that aren't typically taught in school.
That's so true. When you look at someone who didn't do well academically but became successful, it's often because they educated themselves in areas that schools overlook. They become self-taught experts in things that actually lead to financial independence.
The role of mentorship and guidance.
Another important aspect we haven't really touched on yet is mentorship. Often, people who didn't succeed in the traditional school system find mentors outside of that framework. They seek out guidance from experienced people who can show them the ropes.
That's a great point. Mentorship is such a powerful tool for success, and it's something that isn't always available in the classroom. For those who may have struggled in school, finding a mentor can be life-changing. It's like having a roadmap from someone who's already been down the path you want to travel.
Absolutely. Many successful people attribute their success to having a mentor who believed in them, even when the traditional system didn't. And mentors often offer the kind of advice and wisdom that textbooks and lectures can't provide. They help you navigate real world challenges, make smarter decisions, and avoid common pitfalls.
And because they've been through similar experiences, they can relate to the struggles you're going through. A mentor who's failed before knows how to turn that failure into a stepping stone for success, and they can help guide you through the process.
That's so true. A lot of people who didn't do well in school find mentors in their industry, or even in their personal lives, who help them grow into successful individuals. It's about learning from someone who's been where you are and come out on top.
The role of passion and drive.
You know, Alex, another key factor that drives many successful people, especially those who didn't do well in school, is passion. When someone finds something they're truly passionate about, they'll work at it day and night, often regardless of what others think.
Passion is huge. When you're passionate about something, it doesn't feel like work, and that passion fuels the drive to keep going. Even when you hit roadblocks or face failure, it's often the people who find that one thing they really care about who end up achieving massive success, no matter what their academic background looks like.
Exactly. And passion often leads to mastery. If you're passionate about something, whether it's art, technology, business, or even something like sports, you're more likely to put in the time and effort to become an expert in that field. And expertise is what sets people apart.
That's a really good point. Mastery comes from sustained effort, and when you're driven by passion, you're more willing to put in that effort. You don't mind failing because you care more about the long-term goal than the short-term setbacks. Passion gives you the resilience to keep pushing, even when things get tough.
And I think that's something a lot of failing students discover. They may not be passionate about school, but once they find what they are passionate about, they channel all of their energy into it. That's why you see so many people who didn't thrive in school, but ended up thriving in life.
Segment 16. Listener questions and real-life examples.
Before we sign off completely, Alex, I thought it might be cool to dive into a few questions we got from our listeners. A lot of people wanted to know about real-life examples of individuals who failed in school but became wildly successful later on.
Oh, that's a great idea. There are so many inspiring stories out there that show how school failure doesn't have to define your future. One name that immediately comes to mind is Richard Branson, the founder of Virgin Group.
Yes, Richard Branson is an amazing example. He struggled with dyslexia as a kid, which made school incredibly difficult for him. He dropped out of school at 16, and most people would have thought that was the end of his chances. But instead, he started his first business, a magazine called Student, and eventually went on to create Virgin, which is now one of the most successful companies in the world.
Exactly. And Branson is a great example of someone who didn't fit into the traditional academic mold, but found his passion in business. He's spoken openly about how his dyslexia actually helped him become a better leader, because it forced him to keep things simple and focus on the big picture.
That's such an important point. His learning difference didn't hold him back. It shaped how he approached problems. And that's something we see with a lot of successful people who didn't thrive in school. They find ways to use their unique skills or experiences to their advantage.
Another example that comes to mind is Steve Jobs. He dropped out of college after just one semester because he didn't see the point of spending his parents' life savings on an education that didn't inspire him. And look what he went on to do. Co-founding Apple and completely revolutionizing technology and design.
Jobs' story is a perfect reminder that the traditional path isn't for everyone. He wasn't interested in following the conventional route, and instead, he followed his curiosity and passion. That led him to create products that changed the world.
And there's also Mark Zuckerberg, who famously dropped out of Harvard to focus on Facebook. People often assume that you need a degree from an Ivy League school to succeed. But Zuckerberg left before he could get one, and still went on to build one of the most influential companies in the world.
Right. And what's really interesting about Zuckerberg's story is that he didn't drop out because he was failing. He dropped out because he had already found something he was passionate about. He had this incredible vision for Facebook, and he wanted to dedicate all his time to making it a reality. It just goes to show that once you find what you're meant to do, the traditional markers of success, like a degree, don't necessarily matter as much.
Segment 17. Is college worth it?
This brings up a really interesting question that a lot of people debate. Is college even worth it? Especially in today's world, where you see more and more successful entrepreneurs and professionals skipping the traditional college route?
It's a tough question because for some people, college is absolutely worth it. If you want to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, or anything that requires specialized training, then obviously college is essential. But for others, especially those who are entrepreneurial or creatively inclined, it might not be the best investment.
That's a great distinction. If you know that the career you want requires a degree, then yes, college is definitely worth the investment. But if you're unsure, or if you have an idea for a business or project that excites you more than the thought of spending 4 years in school, then maybe you don't need to follow the traditional route.
Exactly. It's about knowing yourself and being honest about what's going to work for you. Some people thrive in a structured learning environment, and they gain a lot from college. But others, like the people we've been talking about, find that they learn more by doing and that the real world offers better lessons than the classroom.
And let's not forget the financial aspect. College is incredibly expensive, especially in countries like the US. Students are graduating with massive amounts of debt, and not all of them are getting jobs that justify that kind of financial burden. For someone who's entrepreneurial, they might look at that debt and think, I could invest that money into starting a business instead.
Exactly. And that's a choice more and more people are making. They're realizing that there are alternative paths to success that don't involve taking on tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans. It's not the right choice for everyone, but it's something to consider.
And Sarah, I think it's also worth mentioning that some of the most valuable skills for success aren't necessarily taught in college. Things like emotional intelligence, resilience, adaptability, and even financial literacy. We've talked about how these are crucial skills, but they're often learned outside of the classroom.
That's so true. And those are the skills that can make or break you in the real world. College can give you a foundation of knowledge, but it doesn't always prepare you for the challenges you'll face in business or life. That's something you have to learn through experience.
Segment 18. How to bounce back from failure.
Since we're on the topic of experience, Sarah, let's talk a bit about how to bounce back from failure. For anyone listening who feels like they've failed, whether it's in school or another area of life, what advice would you give them?
Great question. The first thing I would say is to shift your mindset around failure. It's easy to think of failure as something negative, but in reality, it's just feedback. It's telling you what didn't work so that you can adjust and try again. If you can see failure as a learning opportunity, it becomes much less scary.
That's so true. The fear of failure is often worse than failure itself. Once you realize that failing isn't the end of the world, it frees you up to take more risks and try new things. And with each failure, you're learning and growing.
Exactly. And another thing I'd add is to surround yourself with the right people. Whether it's mentors, supportive friends, or even a community of like-minded individuals, having people who believe in you and can offer guidance makes a huge difference. When you're down, they'll lift you up and remind you of your potential.
And that's great advice. And I'd also say, don't be afraid to pivot. Sometimes failure is a sign that you're on the wrong path, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you're incapable. It just means you need to adjust your approach. Some of the most successful people in the world are those who pivoted after a failure and found something that worked better for them.
Yes, it's all about resilience and adaptability. When you fail, take a step back, assess the situation, and figure out what you can do differently next time. Every failure brings you one step closer to success, as long as you keep moving forward.